The last 18 months have been brutal to virtually everyone and every position within long term care. Long hours, isolation from family and friends, implementing new policies and procedures due to COVID 19, making deeper relationships with residents and then losing those friends, personal stress due to childcare and schooling issues, fear for one's own and your family's safety. The list of stressors seems endless. The seemingly endless nature of the challenges add to the emotional drain. What was viewed initially as 3 to 6 months of crisis turned into 12 to 15 months of survival. Then glimmers of hope arose over the horizon, with vaccines being given and the rates of infection declined, to the point that many facilities began to open up, resulting in friends and family being able to visit their loved ones again. But the initial light of hope has dimmed again with the rise of the Delta variant of COVID 19 and the increase of individuals being affected by the virus and the potential for reinstating measures to stem the spread of the disease. Even if the measures aren't as restrictive as in prior months, the uncertainty of the future increases the anxiety experienced by all of us. At some point, we need to ask ourselves, what kind of race are we running? Fairly early on, many of us realized this season was not going to be a sprint, and we tried to pace ourselves for a long distance event. Somewhere between 6 to 12 months into the pandemic, the situation was looking more like a marathon, a very long race. But now it seems we're going to go beyond a marathon. But to what? Some may say a new way of life. It's possible. Another image could be a march, like when military personnel hike long distances to reposition themselves for another part of the war. I wonder if a journey may be the best picture of where we are and where we're going. Journeys are accomplished day by day. You get up, get ready for the day, take your bearings, and head out. You go towards your goal steadily, persistently, deliberately. Some days the terrain is easier than others. On other days, the progress seems slow and laborious. No one who is personally acquainted with those who serve our elders and disabled questions the commitment of or the emotional drain experienced by the frontline staff, managers, and administrators in these organizations. But just like those medical providers serving patients hospitalized with COVID 19, the reality currently is the job isn't done yet, and we have to continue to serve because if we don't, who will? A key message to supervisors, managers, and administrators, to anyone in some form of leadership is you and your team members are in the midst of a long journey and you need to think and plan for this. Why? Because understanding the priorities needed and the decisions which will follow will likely determine whether you, individually, as a team, or as an organization, will survive this trek. Understanding the nature of stress is key to surviving a long, demanding journey. Often, stress is described as the experience when the demands in one's life are greater than the resources one has to meet or cope with those demands. We experience stress when our bills exceed the amount of money we have to pay them, or we're stressed when we have too much work to do in comparison to the time and energy we have. The result is stress. This obviously can occur in the social and emotional realm. We become stressed when the emotional demands of our job are greater than the emotional resources we have. So, for example, working long hours with challenging residents and potentially difficult family members, as well as coping with the death of a long term friend, would clearly overwhelm almost anyone. The reality is, stress is more complicated than this definition. In reality, stress is the result when perceived demands are greater than perceived resources. This perceptual component is critical to understand if we're going to successfully manage the stress in our lives, and it's critical in times of long-term stress created by extraordinary circumstances, in this case, the pandemic, and also when we have fewer resources to meet those demands. For example, lack of adequate staff. We can, and unfortunately do, increase the stress in our lives when we create higher than necessary expectations for ourselves and for those around us. For example, the level of stress differs depending on whether you're providing meals which are just marginally acceptable in comparison to an exceptional white tablecloth presented dinner. If your organization historically has done above and beyond with regards to extravagant meals, at least occasionally, given the lack of qualified staff and possible leaner times financially, you may have to reconsider whether or not this is a current priority. Retaining high expectations is the result of a perceived demand on resources rather than an actual demand. Similarly, the stress we experience, both individually and corporately, increases when we don't allow ourselves to access available resources to meet daily demands because of how we think about those resources. For example, routinely not taking breaks, including lunch, because there's too much to do, will eventually wear anyone down. While I have just explained where stress comes from, and I haven't given you specific to-do steps yet, use this information this week to begin to track what are the sources of stress that you're experiencing. From which areas? Actual demands, lack of actual resources, perceived demands, or perceptions about resources. Where does your stress primarily originate? In the next video, I'll give you numerous specific suggestions on way to attack your stress and reduce it significantly. Until then, have a great day.